Thank you very much, Baha'i, and good morning, everybody, both here and online. I want to begin by saying something that's so blindingly self-evident that you'll wonder why I'm even bothering to mention it. But I just want to remind us that we humans belong to a social species. Like many other creatures on this planet, our species is such that its members are hopeless in isolation. We absolutely need each other. We need families, we need neighbourhoods, we need communities, groups of all kinds to nurture us and sustain us and to give us that all-important sense of belonging, which for members of a social species is absolutely fundamental to our mental and emotional health. In other words, the survival of our species actually depends upon our capacity to create and maintain social harmony. And so the good news, which shouldn't surprise anyone, is that we are actually hardwired to be that kind of species. Neuroscientists can now peep into our brains in a way that psychologists and philosophers could previously only dream about. And neuroscientists tell us they can find the cooperative centre in the human brain. In other words, it's in our DNA. We're built to be cooperators. We can compete as well, of course. We learn how to compete, but that's not natural for us. What's natural for us is to be cooperators. And what that means in turn is that we have an innate capacity for kindness, for compassion, for respect for other people, because those are, of course, the essential ingredients in cooperation. Now, we talk about kindness rather glibly. A lot of people are, even our new Prime Minister has been talking about the need for kindness. We say it as though we all know what it means. And as Vahid mentioned, I just published a book about kindness, and I realised after it was published that I hadn't actually defined kindness anywhere in the book. So I'm going to define it now. At least I'm going to give you my definition of kindness. And it depends on this idea of us being members of a social species. Because we are members of a social species, our deepest psychological need is to be taken seriously, to be heard, to be understood, to be acknowledged, to be appreciated, to be included. So I would define kindness as anything we do that conveys to another person that we do take them seriously, that we do acknowledge them, we do appreciate them, that we've noticed that they're there. Now that, of course, covers a huge spectrum of possible human behaviours. An act of kindness can be anything from a smile or a wave as you pass a total stranger in the street who you may never see again, but that might have been the moment when that person was feeling bleak, when that person was feeling a bit underappreciated. And just your smile, just your wave, just your greeting might have been the thing that pulled them back from the brink of despair. It might be offering to share a cup of coffee or a sandwich with someone, or to offer someone a bed for the night. I heard recently of a young man who's set up a table in his front garden in Melbourne, and when he has time, he just sits out there with drinks and nibbles and so on, and invites passers-by in his neighbourhood to stop and join him for a drink, and they do in large numbers. That's an act of kindness. People are being connected through that kind of kindness. Possibly the most potent of all the acts of kindness that we can perform for each other is to do what you're doing right now, which is to listen to each other. Thank you for listening. I'm encouraged because you're listening. We're all encouraged when somebody listens to what we have to say. Listening is probably the clearest demonstration we can give to another person that we do acknowledge them, we do take them seriously. Not that we're going to agree with them necessarily, not that we're going to accept what they say to us. But when you listen to someone, without needing to put it into words, what you were saying is, I take you seriously enough to bother listening to what you have to say to me. Footnote, I mightn't like any of it. We might have a ding-dong argument once I've heard what you have to say. That's fine. But I'm not even qualified to disagree with you until I've heard what your position is. Listening is a bit like trying on a coat. If there's a coat hanging on the peg over there, Baha'i says to me, try the coat on, Hugh, and I say, no, that wouldn't suit me, it wouldn't fit. He'd be perfectly entitled to say, well, you don't know, do you? Why don't you try it on? And then tell me if it fits and if it suits you. That's what listening's like, trying on other people's ideas, entertaining what they, and the unspoken message is a message of profound encouragement to the other to say, yes, I'm taking you seriously enough to listen. But notice the opposite. When we don't listen empathically, when we don't listen attentively, the unspoken message that we send to that person is, I'm sorry, I don't take you seriously enough to bother listening to what you have to say. Now, would you ever say that to a partner or a child or a colleague or a friend or a neighbour or a stranger on the bus who wanted to talk to you? No. You'd never put that into words. It'd be too offensive, it'd be too hurtful. Yet when we look at our watch or look over someone's shoulder in the hope of catching sight of someone more interesting to talk to, that's the message we're sending. Sorry, I don't take you seriously enough to bother listening to you. So listening is a very therapeutic gift that we offer other people. In some ways, the ultimate human act of kindness, but there are, of course, all those other acts that I mentioned. I think our capacity for kindness, because we are born into a cooperative species, our capacity for kindness is our most precious human asset. We don't always value it as we should. We can easily be distracted from it by ego-driven impulses, by competitiveness or ambition or acquisitiveness, all the other things that can take us away from our essential human nature. But when we are being true to what Abraham Lincoln described as the better angels of our nature, then we are treating each other as if we understand that we actually are each other, that we are all one. We are members of a species, and members means what it says. Now, of course, we all do experience the tension between our sense of ourselves as independent, unique, special individuals. That's true. We are all those things. The tension between that and our sense of ourselves as members of families, neighbourhoods, faith communities, groups of all kinds. That tension is resolved in one direction or the other all the time, but ultimately, if we are to be true to our nature, it will be resolved in favour of our understanding of ourselves as interdependent, interconnected people. I think of kindness as a unique form of human love. Every form of human love is wonderful, isn't it? Romantic love is energizing and exciting, and familial love is remarkable, allowing us to keep loving people that we don't always find particularly attractive. Companionate love is wonderful. Where would you be without the love of and support of the people in our friendship circles? But then the thing that all those forms of love have in common, and even when we say things like, I love chocolate, or I love dogs, or I love this book or this film, what we're talking about is emotion. We're talking about how we feel about something. We're talking about affection. Kindness is not in that category at all. Kindness is unique in the whole spectrum of possibilities of human love, because it's the only form of love that doesn't depend on affection. It doesn't involve the emotions at all. Because we are social beings, kindness, when we're being true to our essential nature, kindness is simply a way of being in the world. It's not some remarkable, heroic thing that we do in exceptional circumstances. It's like breathing, if we understand the nature of our species. So think of kindness as love without emotion. We don't have to like someone. We don't have to agree with someone in order to be kind to them. We don't have to qualify them in any way. You see someone in need of a bit of help, you don't say, if you're being true to your nature, you don't say, I see you're in a bit of a jam. Now, before I offer to help, how did you vote in the election last weekend? Or do you believe that Jesus rose bodily from the dead? No, we don't qualify people, do we? Kindness is just what we do to other people because we and they are humans and we need each other and we belong to each other and we are part of each other. Samuel Johnson put it beautifully 250 years ago when he wrote a sentence that I think we should all write down and stick up on the fridge or on our desks or somewhere, when he said, kindness is in our power, even when fondness is not. And I think that's a very important reminder that this has got nothing to do with how I feel about you. It's only to do with the fact that you and I are here together and we are human. So that's my little snapshot of what it means to be human. Let me pause now and just ask you to reflect. I mean, our human nature, of course, is all about social cohesion. That's what I'm saying. It is of the essence of a human person to be part of communities that exist through social cohesion. But now just reflect for a moment on what's been happening to our society and to Western societies in general over the last 30 or 40 years. Because what we've been going through as a society has been a period of enormous dislocation and disruption in which we have been driven by some very powerful social trends to move in a direction which is precisely the opposite of what I've just been describing. Our society has been fragmenting. We have been suffering an erosion of social cohesion. As the sociologists put it, we have been atomizing, putting more emphasis on our individual identity than on our sense of connectedness and our need for belonging and connection. This has been a period of social, cultural, demographic, technological, economic upheaval. The cumulative consequence of which has been that we found ourselves, let's say 2020, which is a rather important year in our social evolution, but we found ourselves more socially fragmented than we have ever been before. Now that's a big call, and there isn't time in our brief session together this morning to explore the trends that I'm referring to, but I just want to name them and you'll immediately recognize what I'm talking about. Let me quickly run through what I think are probably the 5 or 6 most powerful social trends pushing us away from our true identity as humans who need each other. Number 1 on my list, our shrinking households. More than 1 household in 4, in fact, in the next 10 years, it'll be about 1 household in 3 contains just 1 person. The fastest growing household type in Australia is the single person household. Our households have been shrinking for 100 years, that's another story, but the rate of shrinkage has accelerated. And why do I mention that? Obviously, in a society where every 3rd or every 4th household contains just 1 person, is a society at risk of greater fragmentation. It doesn't mean that all those people who live alone feel lonely or isolated. Many people who live alone love living alone, have chosen to live alone. They say, I've got friends, I've got colleagues, I've got family, I've got more than enough socialising. I come home at night and I shut the door and punch the air and say, alone at last, peace. There are lots of people like that, and there are lots of people not like that, who are living alone involuntarily because of bereavement or relationship breakdown or relocation for all sorts of reasons, and they don't speak of it like that. They speak of it with an ache, a sense of loneliness nagging at them, nipping at their heels all the time because of their solo householder status. So the risk of increased social isolation and social fragmentation is greatly increased by the trend that seems unstoppable here and around the Western world towards smaller and smaller households, and in particular single-person households. Very quickly, I'll just mention some others. Our rate of relationship breakdown, between 35 and 40% of contemporary marriages will end in divorce. Hugely painful, hugely disruptive. If it's a two-person household, for a while at least, it becomes two single-person households and so on. If kids are involved, even more disruptive, and they often are involved, which is why we have now 1 million dependent kids in Australia living with just one of their natural parents. And moving, mass migration, 500,000 kids once a week or once a fortnight from the home of the custodial parent to the non-custodial parent. Again, an impact on their families, on the micro-communities that they're moving in and out of and so on. While I'm mentioning kids, I'd add the falling birth rate to this list. Relative to total population, we are currently producing the smallest generation of children Australia has ever produced. Why mention it in the context of social cohesion? Any of you who are parents know if you move into a new neighbourhood, it's usually the kids who get to know other kids first. They act as a kind of social lubricant. Well, that social lubricant is in shorter supply than it's ever been in our history. We are compensating to some extent with dogs. That's another story. The graph of the falling birth rate should be compared with the graph of the rising rate of pet ownership in Australia. There are now more pets than humans in Australia, 28 million of them and 24 million of us. Well, maybe that works for some people, but it's not quite the same as kids. Busyness, I'm putting on this list. Notice how busy we all are, how proud we are of being so busy. How are you going, Baha'i? Busy? As though, come on, are you busy or are you dead? The switch has got to be on or off. Oh, I'm so busy. People say, since I retired, I'm so busy, I don't know how I ever found time to go to work. Why? Busyness, the great enemy of social cohesion, the barrier between us and others, a favourite hiding place for people who don't want to take their responsibilities as family members or as neighbours seriously. And of course, the information technology revolution is another factor that's contributed to increasing social fragmentation as we've traded off more and more face-to-face time in favour of screen time, and not even understood what the consequences of that might be. Well, that's the subject for another discussion, except just to say that we now have a well-documented phenomenon in Australian society and Western societies in general of people who are highly connected and lonely. The loneliest segment of the Australian population, more than 30% of them reporting feeling lonely most of the time, are the 18 to 24-year-olds who are also the heaviest users of social media. Can you see the link? Well, the cumulative effect of all of that, and I haven't done justice to any of those trends, but at least identifying, the cumulative effect obviously is that we have favoured individualism over our sense of belonging to communities and our community's need of us, our community's need of our engagement. We've seen as a result the rise of the so-called me culture, the rise of an almost obsessive concern with identity, whether it's gender identity, religious, political, ethnic, all of those things are important to our sense of self. But when we become obsessively concerned about identity, what we're doing is trading off in a deeply unhealthy way, trading off our sense of our connection, our sense of our common humanity in favour of how different and special and unique I am. If you put a society through what I've just been describing for 30 or 40 years, you can predict exactly what would happen. But you don't have to predict it because we've seen what happened. As a result of this sort of social upheaval, we are now living with epidemics of loneliness. 25% of Australian adults report feeling lonely most of the time. Just ponder that. An epidemic of anxiety and an epidemic of depression. This is what happens to social beings when they experience social fragmentation. Well, let me pause again and very quickly just ask you to reflect on our most recent history, because there is potentially good news coming out of all this. 2020, bushfires, the pandemic, still going, and now we better worry as much about flu as we do about COVID, and floods in various parts of it. What did all that do to us? It did what crises and catastrophes always do to us. Those things reminded us that we are in this thing together. They reminded us of what it actually means to be human. They reminded us that when there is a crisis, we need each other. Kindness comes naturally at a time of crisis and catastrophe. We become more aware of the neighbourhood. We become more aware of our responsibilities towards each other. We become more aware of the need to make personal sacrifices in favour of the common good, whether it's staying home or wearing masks or keeping our distance or whatever it might be. But it brings out the best in us as humans when we have, and it's a rather sad reflection, isn't it, on human nature, that we seem to need shocks, disruptions, crises, catastrophes in order to remind us of our common humanity and its claims on us. So the interesting question in 2022 is, have we yet been through enough to pull us back from the brink of where we were going? Have we had enough of a shock? Has this crisis, this catastrophe, been enough to encourage us to turn it into a revolution where we say we knew to be kind when people were losing their houses in a fire or losing family members to COVID or having other disruptions or being wiped out in floods in northern New South Wales, for example. We know then how to act. What about internalising those lessons? What about hanging on to that? What about realising that that was us at our best, at our truest? Why stop? Wouldn't it be pathetic if we just allowed ourselves to slip back into saying, oh, let's get back to normal. Let's get back to being too busy. Let's get back to being stressed. Let's get back to being so reliant on our smartphones that we forget about the lonely neighbour at the end of the street. Let's get back to travelling and buying and doing all the things that we associate with before the crisis. Well, I'd like to dream not only of people who internalise these lessons and decide that we're going to hang on to them, but of a society that learns these lessons and starts to shift the national agenda. How would it be if Australia became renowned not just as the lucky country, which of course is an epithet that was intended originally as an insult. We got by more by good luck than good management, was what Donald Horne was saying when he said we were the lucky country. What about if we became renowned as the loving country? The country committed to social cohesion. The country determined to turn back the impact of these social trends. These are not things that have been done to us. These are things we've done ourselves. We ourselves drive these social trends, of course. But what if we adopted the spirit of the crisis as the spirit of the nation? It would have a huge impact on our approach to reconciliation with the peoples of our First Nations, wouldn't it? It would have a huge impact on the way we deal with our frail aged. It would have a huge impact on the way we treat people who come here perfectly legitimately seeking asylum. It would certainly lead us to take much more urgent action on climate change. We would demand more civility, more kindness in the conduct of our politics and our industrial relations. We'd be much more generous in dealing with people for whom we can find no work, people dealing with disabilities of all kinds and so on. You can easily see how a society could be transformed by simply saying, what did the last 2 years teach us? Could we remember that? And could we go on living like that? If you believe in the fact that a crisis can become a revolution, well, start living it. The only way, if you dream of a kinder, more cohesive society, there is only one way to make it happen. The new government is not going to appoint a minister for kindness or even a minister for social cohesion, and nor should they. The British government appointed a minister for loneliness, and that was a failure. It's not about governments. It's about people who've caught the vision of a more socially cohesive society, of a kinder, more compassionate society, and said, we can make that happen. We start in the street where we live. We start with those of us who believe in this, living as if it is already true. And that's when it comes true. Thank you.